Hello, it's John Robb here. Going to conduct the Q&A of the film White Riot. It's just being shown online at the Sensoria Festival. I'm joined by Rubika Shah and Ed Gibbs, the filmmakers, and Connie Farr, who got the musical content for the film. So I guess let's get into the film part of it first. I mean, what was the original idea and motivation behind making the film itself? I guess we'll start with you, Rubika.
So it was an idea that we had actually quite a long time ago now, 5 years, and it was born out of the Clash footage actually at the Victoria Park Carnival, and a desire to kind of figure out what was that concert and why was it in Victoria Park, and was it a concert that was something that a festival that's on now, but it wasn't. It was actually as we were digging deeper, we found that it was Rock Against Racism, and then when we dug deeper, we realised that it was actually a really small group of people that started this big movement, and I think that was just something that really piqued my interest.
I mean, what was it? The synthesis of music and politics that got you interested? How music can actually, well, especially that time, actually change people.
Yeah, it's definitely the themes that run through my work and Ed's work. I think is generally around youth rebellion and youth culture, and this was definitely something that piqued my interest. Anyway,
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, for me, because I'm twice as old as everyone else here, but I can remember this in real time. I remember when that gig happened. I remember the impact it had, and I remember the impact of Rock Against Racism had on people who maybe got the punk message wrong or the negative idea of it. And so, was this what you were finding out, looking at it retrospectively and historically? That this actually worked. This actually changed people's minds.
yeah, it was a subject I actually didn't really know anything about it, and going into it fresh, actually, there's a richness to it because it's multi-layered. There's so much that went on during that time, and there's a story of punk. And I think with the story of punk, we all know it is the story of fashion and the West London scene and the Sex Pistols and the Pins and the music and the working class youth. But there's so much more to it actually. The Rock Against Racism, the graphics, the vibrant kind of culture that was coming out of that, where music is standing up, people standing up for what they believe in.
I mean, Ed, what will you bring to the table? You're like a journalist, so are you kind of doing the research side of this, creating the storyline, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm a journalist. We sort of researched it together, wrote it together. It was a very collaborative um,
Mhm.
process working on this. I think what really blew me away about the story was how it just sort of swept the UK, and every corner of the country seemed to be caught up and involved in this, and how it spreads just virally. Really, I think captured both of our imaginations, and the fact that it was started by you know, these people that we didn't know anything about them to begin with, but these are just kind of like regular, professional people trying to make a difference, and starting with that spark, the Clapton and the letter to Enemy, etc. Um, but yeah, in terms of, I mean, there was a lot of research. We spent a long time going down multiple rabbit holes with this. So in terms of shaping the story, it took a while to kind of decide and to focus on, a period, a specific period, and to figure out what the shape of it should be.
What
Although
makes
it
it?
was fairly, sorry.
What were you trying to capture in it? Were you trying to capture? There's a lot of strands, of course. I mean, politically, it's great. This idea that youth culture can change the world. Make people think better. But also the strands of. I mean, punk was an incredibly vibrant, exciting musical form. But also, Britain in the late '70s was quite a different place. And were these all kind of strands you were trying to embrace making the film?
Well, in terms of making White Riot, actually, our approach was first of all we just wanted to tell the story of Rock Against Racism because we were so taken by that story of these young guys that were working this print shop and what they did and how they managed to like grow this movement from basically 5 people to, you know, hundreds of thousands of people around the UK. And that was our starting point. But when we, you know, went into the archives of Rock Against Racism, we quickly found out that it was, you know, 5 years this movement was. And, you know, there were so many different strands to it. You know, there's the Manchester strand, there's like all over the UK, all over the world, like this movement went everywhere. So we figured out within probably the first year of development, I'd say, that we wanted to tell the story of the beginning. So the bit that really got us excited about the story, so the print shop, the guys, you know, coming together, that word of mouth kind of activism that, you know, we don't really see as much anymore. And we wanted to end on a high, so we knew that we wanted to end with the Clash and White Riot. Because, you know, why not? That was like the peak of that gig, and it was also an idea that we wanted people to leave the cinema or to leave the screening feeling that, you know, inspired, and feeling like, you know, that they had just watched something that wasn't gonna. Yeah, there's a lot of, you know, hard, tough issues. You know, there's a lot of hard things in the film, you know, some of the issues that are tackled, you know, the racism, the violence, you know, but we wanted people to feel like they were inspired to be able to, I guess, change the world.
I mean, the interesting thing about that gig was the Clash weren't even headlining, were they? It was Tom Robinson, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
That's right. Poor old Tom didn't get to play his full set either. But that's a whole other story, isn't it? But I think I just wanted to add to what Ruby said. Actually, I think the other thing that was really important to get across was, as you said, how different Britain was then, and it was a nasty place. And as in terms of getting the tone right, we had to get that across. And well, it needed to be an entertaining film. Otherwise, you have to make it entertaining. Otherwise, people aren't going to want to watch 90 minutes of racism, are they? Do you know what I mean? You have to make it engaging, you know, and entertaining and punk and.
Well, I think it's a punk doc, isn't it? So
it's a punk doc.
There's an expectation there that, you know, that people want to feel, at least leave like feeling that, you know, that it's got a punk feel, and you know, and I think we spent a lot of time trying to capture that, didn't we?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it was also important, well, for me anyway, to remind people or to tell people what it was like on the street in the cities, and just how dangerous it was, and just how dangerous these, you know, NF thugs were, you know, and what they could do and what they were being allowed to do, and how they were being, you know, given this platform by the media and protection by the police, etc. All that stuff. It was really important to, you know, present that as it was, you know.
was it quite a shock to find how different that period was from now? I mean, now we have other problems of racism. It's different problems, but it still exists, which is really disappointing. But now it's just people generally just on Facebook or social networking talking rubbish. But then it was nastier, wasn't it? It was pint pots in your face, nasty, wasn't it?
You know what I find that actually, you're right, but what I actually find really scary now is that, in a sense, I feel like the almost like the fascists have won, because they're in power. You've got fascists in power all around the world, and you know, or you can call them what you like, far right or whatever, but that's really shocking to me, that the situation we're now in 2020, it's really shocking. It's how we've suddenly flipped to that, you know, and it's.
I remember at the time people always said, you know, if they learned to wear suits, this would be far more dangerous, and they did. So you're right there, aren't you? I mean, when you make a film like this, do you think that kind of situation could be recreated in this time? I think media is far too fractured now. There's too many little corners everywhere. As then, 4 or 5 bands playing a gig like that in a park would get 50,000 people out for a cause, whereas now it'd be split over loads and loads of different places, wouldn't it? I think it's more difficult. Or do you think it's doable, but in a different way?
Well, I mean, I don't want to keep talking.
No,
I feel
you
like,
jump in. No,
I mean, the thing.
We've got 45 minutes.
We have got 40 minutes. The thing was, when we were editing the film, Extinction Rebellion, and actually when we first screened the film at the London Film Festival, Extinction Rebellion was really kicking off. Like, it was literally kicking off down the road in Trafalgar Square when we were screening the film, while we were screening the film. And it was really inspiring that that youth protest activism was alive and well and cutting through to the mainstream. And that sort of gave us a sense of hope. And that, I think, added to the importance of ending with a sense of hope that the film has. I think, you know, you go out and, you know, to suggest to people, go out and, you know, change the world or whatever.
It was interesting you were saying before that the people who started the movement, the printers, because the graphics were really important. They had fantastic graphics, didn't they? The arrow is great. It's a great piece of artwork, great piece of pop culture artwork. And was this something you tried to reflect in the film? You know, it's not just the music and the message, but it's also the graphics and the styling as well.
Absolutely. We were really inspired by their fanzine. They've got this brilliant fanzine called Temporary Hoarding that was published pretty much as and when they could do it, when they could afford to do it, and slipped in between the other newspapers as the drivers would go and drop them off around the country. So it was like proper grassroots, you know, word of mouth, sending out your fanzines and getting them in various places. And it really inspired us because it told the story, I think, of that era, and it was a lot of issues that were like close to our hearts. So things that we thought about, like a lot of stories that weren't getting reported in the mainstream press, and stories that were giving, I guess, a voice to the voiceless in a sense. But they did this in a really youthful and punk way, where they took the graphics and they took the the graphics of the time. Well, they were artists and they were printers and they were musicians. They were basically like just a big creative group of people, and they did the graphics themselves. So they would do things like they would connect different social issues, but they do it in a way that was really punk and really of the time, you know, with cutting out bits and pieces and sticking them together and layering and using mad type fonts and stuff. So we straight away we were like, you know, we need to get this in the film. You know, we want it to feel punk, we want there to be animation, and we want there to be lots of archive, like the three ingredients that you try and stay away from in filmmaking. The animation took forever. You know, you look at the sequences and some of them are only 10-15 seconds, but they would take days to put together because there's so much that goes on in the back end with putting those different graphics together, creating them first of all, because, you know, there was only so much that we could cut out from the original fanzine. We'd have to recreate most of them, and also we had to recreate them for the story that we were telling. You know, because although it inspired our story, it wasn't directly related to it. There were other issues that were close to our hearts that we wanted to put in. Yeah.
Was there also a sense with punk itself? It was like a new generation coming in, new kind of rock music, and maybe new values, different values. And I've often wondered if part of it was just a rebellion against the old rock stars like Eric Clapton, of course, musically and culturally. But when he did that completely mental speech on stage in Birmingham, which for years I thought he just said a couple of stupid things. But it's about 15 minutes long, and there's plenty of time to stop and go, "What am I doing?" But he just carried on, didn't he? And he's never actually apologised for it. And other stars disappointed, like Rod Stewart, who was making great music in the early 70s, saying similar kind of things off the cuff. And even David Bowie having that mad thing at Victoria Station, which he actually did apologise for. But was there a sense when you're making the film there was a feeling that this is a new generation wanted to maybe have a different kind of narrative that was going around their music?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was also the time of, around that time, it had got quite flabby, hadn't it? Rock music had got quite, well, for want of a better term, flabby. And, you know, you had rock stars living in castles and making ridiculous films and videos. I mean, what did Led Zeppelin make? That ridiculous film they made where they were all...
Sort of remain the same, yeah.
That's right, yeah. I mean, great concert footage, but all the stuff in between is just completely bonkers, isn't it? It's just rock stars had a bit too much of everything, and I think there was a lot of rebellion, and probably, I guess, a rebellion against the previous generation as well, because there was a whole thing of punks wearing swastikas as well, which was an interesting and rather frightening rebellion as well, and that was, you know, a rebellion against the sort of rationing generation, I suppose, as well. Yeah, there's a lot
It was
going
kind
on.
of it was not a great idea, but it was kind of nuanced because it was also flirting with sort of left field art and underground films, and not a good idea, no. But it wasn't. Someone like Susie wearing a swastika armband was no. She was never a fascist person, you know. But it doesn't look good in a photograph 45 years later, no. But it's because of the Night Porter film, and it comes from another source, so it's complicated. Punk was a complicated subject, and I guess maybe what's great about the film that you've made is underlining one of the great positive kind of themes. Out of all that chaos, somebody actually managed to coalesce a really important message out of it.
Absolutely. I mean, and they weren't even really punks, were they? I mean, they were too old to be punks. I mean, the Ra crew were, you know, were soul boys, really. I mean, Roger was
Roger was, yeah,
definitely a soul boy, and they'd been activists during, you know, they protested against the Vietnam War, which is something we were trying, you know, it was one of the many rabbit holes we went down, but we couldn't squeeze it in the film. But they had a whole culture and history of activism, didn't they?
yeah.
And
Yeah, and there was a whole East London scene as well. You know, like we think about East London now as, you know, Hackney and the whole hipster world, but you know, back then there was a whole radical left scene. You know, with really radical left intellectuals coming to you know, East London and talking in these kind of underground you know, basements. You know, giving lectures and stuff, because this stuff wasn't really thought of as you know, I guess it wasn't seen as something that would be popular, but it was popular, you know. So it was that, I guess I always think of it as this like culture of like the cardigans, the big, like, you know, fluffy old man cardigans, and Red actually explains it really well. You could probably can you do the diddly eye diddly dum? No. Okay.
you put me on the spot. You want me to perform? Put me on the spot.
Just watch the film.
That's a good segue to speak to our music supervisor now. And how can we
which
lighten
is
the
actually what I was about.
crack?
I was about to do, because I was thinking, Connie, with a film like this, it must be a gold mine, mustn't it? I mean, it was a fantastic period for music. Where do you start? I mean, what do you do? How do you, or is it just really difficult to get the right songs that actually capture the mood?
But it was Ed. Ed and I met, what, 3 years ago? Maybe even longer. And Ed had a really big list of songs. And basically, my role in it was to try and put together a strategy with him. Say no, lots of times no, but try and see what we could do with it. There were so many songs that you wanted to put in there, and we had to do so much research into the ones that were possible, the ones that it was going to be difficult. You know, doing all the kind of legwork with the research with the rights holders and things like that. I mean, Ed came to me with all the different options, because we had tons. Do you remember? We went through tons of different choices. It was really enjoyable. It was really, really enjoyable. We'd got one list down, and then we had to half it, and then we put some more in, and it was, it was more, I was just there very much on the practical side of it, you know, very much the kind of logistics of how to get as many songs in as we possibly could, to make it as good as it is, basically.
I mean, what kind of qualified the songs? Was it what they were about, what they sounded like, or was it from people who were actually in that period and involved in that movement? You know, I mean, not as people organisers, but bands who did those kind of gigs. Was there a criteria?
There was a combination, wasn't there, of live stuff? Yeah.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, up to you.
Yeah, Connie, start with Connie. Yeah.
Oh, Connie.
No, all I was going to say is there was a mixture of the live footage and the live recordings you had, and then the tracks that you wanted to put in. You go.
No, I was actually going to apologise, because it was probably my fault actually that there were so many changes later on, because I was like editing it. I ended up editing it as well, and I would my approach was just like, oh, that's a really great punk track. Okay, yeah, we'll just stick that in. Yeah, that sounds really great. And then Ed was going, I don't know if we should probably use that one. I think we should probably go with maybe let's go with a different band.
But I think when it came down to it, though, a lot of it was feeling. You know, like there's a Gang of Four track in there, and although we did interview Andy Gill, the late great Andy Gill, you know, the interview didn't make it into the film, as the many interviews didn't make it into the film. We couldn't find a place for the interview, but it just the song was so evocative of the time, and it just worked so well in the narrative that it was like we have to have that Gang of Four track. We just have to find a way to have it. It just felt so right. With I think it was during a temporary hoarding sequence, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's when Ra Goes National. We had little names for each of the different sections, and that was the Ra Goes National, because it's when everyone's picking up the phone, calling each other, saying, you know, listen, mate, have you heard about this thing called Ra? You've got to start Ra Bognor Regis. I think that's one of the best quotes in the film, and it's almost like it's the equivalent of it spreading virally. But one of my favourite bands that I discovered actually making this was 999. And people are like, oh, 999, like what a random, you know, discovery. Because I don't know, I don't know if they, punks will probably be able to tell me better, like if they're still popular.
Well, they're still playing.
They're still playing, yeah. They're still
really
and they were very pleased to be part of. They were very pleased to be part of the film. They were very grateful to be included. The funny thing is, when we had like the big list of all the different songs, it was quite useful because we were going through all the research and the rights of the different songs at the same time that Rubika was editing it. So on a strategy level, it was the best way to do it, because even if it was a massive list, you still knew which ones you definitely couldn't have. And also, it was a unique project in that everybody's on the same level playing field when it came to fees and things like that. You know, you're either involved in the film and you want to be involved or not. So it's quite a unique project in that respect from my point of view. You know, there's not too much convincing of artists to get involved. They either want to be part of the telling of the story or not. So do you see what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I guess, the small acts, say like 999, of course it's great that somebody remembers your music years later. But say for the bigger bands, you have to go through like massive publishers, and it starts to get a bit difficult. Are they smart enough to realise this actually reflects well on the catalogue? Like there.
Well, that's funny enough. 999 actually, the master rights were with somebody in Germany. That was actually a fairly complicated situation. And the majors, I mean, you have to, they read the synopsis, obviously. They've got a million different requests in a day, but you have to really persevere and be like, read past the synopsis, because if you turn this down on the basis of the fee, you're omitting that band from being part of the story, which they will probably have a real issue with when the film comes out. There was a lot of that conversation going on with rights holders and stuff. You know, it's not, I mean, they've got a million requests in a day. You know, they'd see it as, you know.
So sometimes would you have to go to the bands direct to speak to them?
We did in a few cases,
yeah.
Or people that were just contacts we have that still know the band. So there was quite a lot of that. That would then speak to the publisher and sort of create a shortcut.
So that's a real skill of someone like you doing a good job of this, because you actually know who to go to, not just somebody who's a bit bored in an office who's never heard of the band.
Yeah, exactly. So from the creative point of view, that was Rubika and Ed completely. They came up with a big list, and then I had to work out from that list, right, these ones are a yes, these ones are a maybe, these ones are going to be real hard work, and then kind of working around that, and sort of that kind of strategy, I think, was basically, would you agree that was kind of the way we kind of went about it, and what we're trying to get as many tracks in as we could?
Yeah, without overdoing it. I think that was the other thing. It was, I think the other thing I realised anyway was it was kind of helpful to have a limit on how many songs we could get, because I think it's got the right number of songs.
You've got about 11 or 12 songs in there, and it feels about right. Otherwise, it feels a bit bombarded with, you appreciate the ones that are in there.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
music's
right.
so key
Exactly.
to the story. Yeah, I mean, because without the music, none of this would have existed, would it? It is the key. You have to get it exactly right, because every watching will know as well, won't they? Which songs fitted and which ones didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you feel a pressure on that? Coming in, looking at retrospectively at a scene, almost like trespassing on a different time.
I was really nervous at the beginning because you just don't know. Like I've worked in I've made a couple of like music films, and you just know that if an artist pulls out or whatever, that's it. That's like So we knew right from the outset, I think, that the music was crucial, and I think that's why Ed and Connie worked together, and because it wouldn't have been a punk doc without any punk music.
Yeah, yeah. And what was it like to interview them? Was there any interviews you really liked doing that made an impression on you?
Gosh, that's a big question, actually. I mean, I always love to interview Red. I mean, our main character, Red Saunders. I mean, he's just a fantastic guy, and he's got so many stories. We often joke he's got like about 5 or 6 different films, like in different, in his life,
Yeah,
about the various
yeah,
things that he did and he was involved in. This is once, it's a big story, and it's a big story that influenced a lot of people, and had a really big impact. Rock Against Racism did, but it was actually a really small part of Red Saunders' life if you look at his whole history of everything that he's done. And also it was brilliant to interview Pauline Black. She's brilliant. We had to have her in the film, even though, I probably shouldn't say this, but, the timeline isn't quite, she comes into RA after, or gets involved in, starts to select her after the Rock Against Racism gig. So we did
that's
play around with the
perfect.
timeline just a little bit, yeah. But I thought she's just
Yeah,
such a brilliant.
but she's an escapulation of everything Rock Against Racism was about, because the Selector are a black and white band playing a black and white version of black music. I mean, it's so multicultural. It's brilliant, isn't it? And all the kids going to their gigs. It's definitely, without Rock Against Racism, that situation could not have existed, could it? So I think it's great, and also, as you say, she's really eloquent. She's a brilliant talker, isn't she?
Oh yeah, I mean, she had a really interesting, unique point of view, I think, and it was a kind of a bit of a balance as well. I think some of the things she said, I think it was a good kind of.
Well, yeah, I mean, she basically, yeah, she says it for how it is.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
I think they're important things that she says, and it was important to have like quite a cross section of people that were involved in RA. So, I think the other important thing about Rock Against Racism is that it wasn't male dominated at all. It was quite equal in the sense there were lots of women involved, a lot of women, pushing the boundaries in terms of, I wouldn't even say the top positions, but in terms of, making the big creative decisions behind, what is Rock Against Racism going to do next? Because remember, when they started, so, they didn't know at that moment in 1976 that in 1978 they were going to have this huge, massive cultural moment. They were just like hanging out and like discussing and connecting over, music and politics, basically.
There was no plan.
It was just,
No,
yeah, but
there's never a plan, is it? You have to, I guess you just have to run with it. I mean, what was any sort of common strands going through the interviews? Do people sort of paint quite a bleak view of the times, or quite an uplifting version of the times? Making something out of nothing, politically and culturally.
I think most people are optimistic, actually, generally speaking. I can't remember anyone being quite negative. I think because as soon as you mention Rock Against Racism, everyone that was involved in it or that it touched the lives of are really, really, really positive about it, because it was just something magical in their mind. It's not really been replicated. It's not something that's happened again in the same way. That sense of spontaneity that was in it, people just coming together and doing something, standing up for what they believe in. That magic spark hasn't, I don't think, happened in the UK. So people were really, really excited to talk about it, and there was a lot of goodwill in that sense in terms of trying to get us what we needed, like archive. We ended up with too much archive in the end.
Yeah.
didn't know what to do with it all, did we?
No.
And we didn't know who owned half of it, so that was another big, interesting 4
Big
weeks.
job. Yeah.
What do you feel the legacy of Rock Against Racism is? Is there a legacy, or is it just so far gone now that it's kind of faded into the past a bit? Or
Well, I hope that the legacy is that people now will look at it and they'll see that actually there's a lot of similarities around what was happening at the time, and that people were able to come together, and the grassroots activism is something that can be replicated now, and I hope people will be inspired by it. I think in terms of the legacy, two-tone, I guess, something that I think Jerry Dammers does talk about, that he was influenced by Rock Against Racism. And I think there were could one say that the ideas behind Live Aid, there was a story about how they were inspired by what they did at the Rock Against Racism carnivals, because there were multiple carnivals. That we end with the carnival with the Clash, but there were loads more carnivals and big events.
Geldof actually said that he got the idea for I'm sure you read this somewhere, didn't you?
Yeah.
Actually, there was an interview. He said he got the idea for Live Aid from the Ra carnivals. Inspired.
That's interesting. I didn't know that, but it makes sense. Totally makes sense. Yeah. So has it been quite frustrating, the film coming out in this really sort of bizarre time?
Just a bit, yes. Well, I mean, who would have known? I mean, thank God we got to Berlin, because we had a big international premiere at Berlin, and thank God that happened, because I think we just would have been heartbroken if we hadn't been able to screen at Berlin, But we were supposed to have a big launch at Glastonbury, and that obviously didn't happen, because Glastonbury didn't happen, and that was really sad. And we had a lot of other festivals that had invited the film, which most of them aren't happening now. So yeah, it's been it's disappointing that we can't do it as nature intended, but at least we can get it out to people.
Yeah, the main thing now is that I hope that people can see it in the big on the big screen, in cinemas, because we made it with that in mind. So we mixed the music, and we really spent a lot of time on the sound to make it a multi-sensory experience. So hopefully, fingers crossed, it will be released soon and in cinemas.
September
as well.
I think because it's one of those because it's such a classic period, a timeless period, and a document like this, an important document of part of that timeless period. It doesn't matter if somebody sees it now or in 3 years' time. It's not. You're not locked into a moment. It had to be shown this year, otherwise no one's going to be interested anymore. So it's got a longevity, I think.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that actually, because we're just in the moment where we've been making it for so long, and we're like, oh, we need to get it out there quick. But you're right, we'll have a life.
Speaking of a life, are you actually working at any other film projects at the moment? Is that possible?
Trying to have a bit of downtime. I'm working on a couple of other things at the moment. I'm actually going into an edit for something on Monday that should be finished soon. So yeah, and also trying to have a bit of chill out time after making this film for 5 years, 6 years, 5 years.
Wow. Yeah. And Connie, for you, how does this all affect your work?
Well, as we were saying earlier, like a lot of the projects I was working on were actually in post as we went in. Thank God, apart from a couple that we've had to obviously pause. But I do a lot of trailer and promo work, which I'm so grateful for, because obviously we're doing tons of promo campaigns for TV shows, sports, etc. But yeah, I'm just waiting for all the productions to start again, all the ones that I kind of had my name in the hat for at the beginning, all the ones that I've worked with the people before, and the team are waiting for them to start again, at the end of the year. But it's kind of given some time to actually, dare I say it, really listen to music, probably all those jobs you've been wanting to do for ages. I'm I really want to get together all the music and put it into I've been grateful for the time to actually digest a lot of stuff and put it in a bit more of an order, rather than working on multiple things at once, you know.
Or almost learning to fall back in love with music as an art form, in a sense.
Yeah, or not just listening just for the immediate project you're on, kind of listening more for like, okay, right, just, you know, it has had its benefits for sure in that respect, because I haven't really had time to stop and think other than what I'm immediately working on, you know.
Yeah.
Like I was interested in what you were
Rubika,
talking about the Turkish band that you were talking about earlier. I'm like, oh, that sounds like I want to know what that is. So I'm going to put that on like that. It's been really nice having that time to explore more.
I'll send you a few links because there's some great music out
Yeah.
there. Yeah, yeah. So Rubika and Ed, I mean, when you see all the Black Lives Matter thing going on, do you think this gives the film a new relevance, a different relevance, or a reminder of a story of another time, another struggle?
I think it definitely gives it added relevance. Unfortunately, I think the scary thing. I just need to say this because it's occurred to me the other day. I was talking to someone about this and how fascism, without it sounding too you know heavy-handed about it, but this whole thing of fascism and the far right is always just under the surface, and it's always there. And I think that's something we've all perhaps been reminded of in the last few years, is that it didn't go away. I think we thought it had, but I don't think it ever goes away. It's always, sometimes you just manage to keep it down, but it's always there somewhere, like a little evil ogre. And yeah.
I think the beauty of the great thing about rock against racism, it made it unfashionable to be racist for 2 years, and there's a lot of very young, impressionable kids who are getting into punk who could have easily been swayed the other way, but when they saw the cool bands like the Clash just say that's just a bit naff. I mean, that's all pop and politics has to do. It doesn't really have to make a manifesto or a complex statement. It just has to make the rubbish stuff look a bit silly. If the cool people aren't into it, then no one's going to be into it. And that was the beauty of rock against racism all the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, no
it
fun.
worked.
Yeah.
NF, no fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it's simple, isn't it? Have you spoken to Red recently at all? Or?
Yeah, we spoke to him the other week, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's his take on Black Panther?
Gosh, I don't know if did I speak to him? I think I spoke to him just before. Did you spoke to him after?
I haven't spoken to him about Black Lives Matter actually, but so.
But we should definitely ask him. So we will next time.
Be interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sure when the statue came down in Bristol, he'd have been cheering. Yeah. So we're still in the pandemic, I guess, and no one knows what's going on there. So what are the plans with the film now? Is it more kind of online screens like this? I mean, how are you getting it out there? Where can people watch it? People watching this interview seen it now, but if they've got friends who want to watch it, which I'm sure they have, where can they see it?
Modernfilms.com for all the latest information. Yes. Yeah. So we have. I should probably do that again, shouldn't I? We hadn't rehearsed that. There's a whole lot of previews, virtual previews, like we've been doing with festivals, wonderful festivals, and like this one, and then hopefully, touch wood, September theatrical release in cinemas and around the country. So, but yeah, modernfilms.com is the place to go to find out where the next one is.
And there's also White Riot's film Twitter page as well. Keep that up to date as well.
Yes. All the social media channels. All the usual.
Well, excellent. Well, good luck with that. Brilliant. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for making the film. It's an important story to be documented. And thanks for doing the interview. Thanks to you, Connie, as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Cheers.
Bye.